Indonesia has now positioned itself as a key international node in the global supply chains for EV battery components. That's a very significant success.
Yeah.
I go back to in an environment of uncertainty, an environment of higher costs. Do policies, do regulations that create more certainty and create lower costs. If you do those things, that can be a big source of advantage for Indonesia. Of the 3 ASEAN countries that US-ABC members have seen the most growth potential, we call them the VIP club. Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines. Yeah, it's a great time for, as US companies are doing their homework, the infrastructure development, human capital development, and again, the policy, transparency, and consistency. Those are the 3, I think, most important variables that will allow Indonesia to really grow in terms of its importance in supply chains.
The world around us is changing very quickly, geopolitically, economically, and technologically. And these shifts are reshaping how nations collaborate. Indonesia and the United States stand at an important crossroads with economic potential to redefine what partnership looks like in the years ahead. I'm Iqbal Swita Mahaja is back in Jakarta Globe Corner, and today we will discuss the future of US-Indonesia partnership in a redrawn global landscape with the Executive Vice President of Research and Chief Policy Officer of the US-ASEAN Business Council, Mr. Marc Mealy. How are you, Marc?
I'm great, thank you. It's good to be here.
Thank you so much for being here. Spare your time to discuss about this issue. First of all, we would like to discuss about Indonesia-US business and investment relations, of course. How would you characterize the current trajectory of Indonesia-US business and investment relations from the perspective US companies?
Sure. I think the good starting point is in 2025, we saw the continued growth and expansion of US commercial business relations with Indonesia. So I think we're starting the year in a very positive foundation. There's optimism that there's more opportunities for U.S. companies to expand their activities. So that's one thing we're very much focused on. I think the second thing is with the great potential, we know there's areas that continue to be worked on and improved to expand these kinds of commercial activities, to make the domestic environment more conducive for business to do more in the country. So I think we're at a good point starting here in 2026.
Okay, we are at a good point. So which sectors are seeing the strongest momentum in U.S. Investment into Indonesia, and what is driving that growth?
Well, first and foremost, we've always thought that the market potential here has not been fully realized. As ASEAN's sort of largest economy, we think there's more really potential for growth and development to take place. So some of the sectors where we've seen U.S. companies particularly keen to expand are like in the ICT sector, where we've seen big investments in the ICT infrastructure like data centers. Another area that we see growth potential in the area of agriculture. Again, we know there's lots of initiatives to really improve food consumption across the entire population. I would also say things like healthcare and education. Also, I think represent areas where there's, again, good growth potential for U.S. companies to do business here.
Wow. So speaking about investment, some other countries will also look first regarding the regulatory and policy environment today. How do you see, or maybe U.S. firm perceive Indonesia's regulatory and policy environment today?
I think we've, over time, the policy environment relative to other ASEAN countries, let's say like Vietnam or like Malaysia, has been a bit more challenging. However, we've certainly seen improvements in some of the policy approaches by different Indonesian governments. I think looking ahead, there's roughly three areas I could highlight that's really going to be really important for U.S. investors. Number one, continued investment in infrastructure, particularly in terms of electricity and power, is a growing area. Number two, the continued focus on building better talent
Okay.
in Indonesia. So here we think about things like process learning and digital literacy.
Okay.
Really going to be important, particularly in the tech sector. And then number 3, as you mentioned, policies and regulations are really going to be scrutinized now because, as you indicated, we're in a period now where there's more uncertainty in the world. We're also entering a period where there's higher costs for business. Therefore, if the government of Indonesia can pursue a policy and regulatory agenda that reduces uncertainty, helps to lower costs for doing business, that will make Indonesia even more attractive for U.S. companies to do more here.
So these 3 points will attract more U.S. firms that.
Yes.
Okay. The world is changing, but also there's been some changes following President Trump's reciprocal import tariff, Mark. Has it brought any changes or impact on the currently ongoing business?
I think there's 2 ways that since the start of these government-to-government tariff negotiations have impacted business. Number 1, part of those tariff discussions actually include commercial deals. So there are companies, U.S. companies, that have actually said, if the best way to make our trade relationship a bit more balanced is for U.S. companies to do commercial deals with Indonesian companies. So in a sense, Indonesian companies buying more goods from U.S. firms. So we're seeing some of that in different areas. Number 2, part of these negotiations also include requests by the American business community to make certain changes in, let's say, domestic regulations or domestic policies. So to the degree that the negotiations reach a successful conclusion, part of the commitment will include some alterations in domestic regulations, domestic policies. So I think that's the interest, and that's why I think it sets up a good opportunity going ahead once the final deal is negotiated.
Mark, speaking about the political elites, we know that President Trump and President Prabowo looks very get along in the international forum. How do you see it, and how do U.S. business assess Indonesia's policy direction in this administration, particularly in industrial transstreaming, digital regulation, and energy transition?
Yeah. Energy transition is an area where, again, there's a lot of interest. And we are seeing very concrete actions by the government to put in place policies and regulations that, for example, like in the growing area of around carbon capture and storage as a growth industry, the development of carbon markets to maybe allow trading of carbon credits. These are areas that I think are going to position Indonesia well for energy companies and others who want to pursue those things. I think in the ICT space, again, this is an area where there's lots of growth potential. And Indonesia's got a very strong foundation in the tech world. As we know, some of the most important startups in ASEAN have been born.
We have several unicorns.
Yeah, exactly. Have been born here in Indonesia. So when we see opportunities for U.S. firms to be part of the ecosystem, to again, build talent, help build the infrastructure, I think that's because U.S. firms and Indonesia realize there's a good synergy there to both benefit from that development. So I think, again, it's a great moment to really say, how can we really move these areas forward in some of these kinds of sectors?
But are you confident about this, I mean, in the near future, 2026, or maybe in the next 5 years, Mark?
I am confident. First, I'm confident about ASEAN.
Yeah.
I think even as the world is really kind of going through a period of change, ASEAN and 11 members, individual countries, have the benefit of being in a part of the world that is globally significant in terms of trade, in terms of manufacturing, but then also we call it ASEAN's economic centrality in all of Asia is also really important right now. So what we're saying to all the governments in the region, now is the time where if you can make additional reforms at the regional level, deepen regional integration. That's really important right now. So, for example, one of the most important things that all ASEAN countries can do right now individually is to successfully conclude the negotiations for the Digital Economy Framework Agreement, the DEFA, by the end of this year. If the 11 members of ASEAN can do that this year, that will be, again, a potential further game changer to make this part of the world the place that all the digital companies want to do business.
Wow, looking forward, Mark. So what are the make or break factors that determine whether Indonesia becomes a top tier investment destination for US companies or maybe among ASEAN?
I think, again, the potential is here. The size of the economy is here. As I mentioned those areas earlier, infrastructure development, human capital development, and again, the policy, transparency, and consistency. Those are the three, I think, most important variables that will allow Indonesia to really grow in terms of its importance in supply chains and really then take advantage of the resource potential that's here, the downstreaming efforts that are, because again, we believe that there are U.S. companies with the right environment that would want to be partners in those downstreaming areas. In fact, earlier this week, I had a chance to spend time with colleagues from the Danantara, and they highlighted a number of industry sectors that they were particularly keen on, things like waste to energy, things in the healthcare space. I'm actually looking forward to getting back to the States, telling my clients about these opportunities. And if I can get them interested, we'll be able, as US-ASEAN Business Council, to help bring both U.S. business and government together on some of these priority sectors.
So Danantara is a thing now then. So how do you convince the business players there to, invest here through Danantara?
I think there's a recognition that, and this is a bigger picture, there's a recognition in Indonesia that for the economy to continue to grow, to develop, but also transform, there's a role for the state through the SOEs, sovereign wealth fund, to play a role in catalyzing more private investment. So there's got to be those degrees of partnership between both. And I think that if you can maybe convince a foreign investor that, hey, here's a project area. Government's going to be involved. We're going to be supporting. We're going to mobilize resources. But there's also space for private capital to come in. My sense is if the private capital feels that, okay, that's a good vertical. Let us understand the policy environment, the regulatory environment. If they see the commercial opportunity, they will probably say we can come in and be collaborative with the government, with Danantara in certain sectors.
Interesting that you mentioned about downstreaming, because President Prabowo also always highlighting about downstreaming, food self-sufficiency, energy self-sufficiency. These updates also being delivered right to your clients? Or
I think part of our role at US-ASEAN Business Council is to communicate to our members. These are some of the priority objectives of the government of Indonesia. We think it's very important for U.S. companies to understand those priorities. It doesn't necessarily mean they want to do the same business, but they should understand those priorities. Then our job is say, how can we bring both business and government together to exchange views, exchange perspectives, and then potentially see, are there commercial opportunities in those government priority sectors that a U.S. firm could say, we want to compete. We want to maybe plug into that opportunity.
Okay. So with so many global economic challenges these days, in the last couple of years, from the vantage point of U.S. businesses, how is ASEAN's strategic importance evolving in the global economy? You mentioned about it is central of the ASEAN.
So I think we start from the point of view that Southeast Asia is a very important part of the global economy and a very big part of America's trade relationship with the world. Many people don't realize that 6 of the 10 ASEAN countries are actually ranked in the top 30 two-way trade partners for America in the whole world. Okay, so the trade relationship is actually quite strong. In the changing environment, though, there may be opportunities for new supply chains to emerge. Companies may decide that they maybe want to relocate certain operations to different countries. So here again, ASEAN is well positioned to say, hey, if you're a U.S. company and maybe you're looking at maybe changing your supply chain, take a look at us. Take a look at ASEAN. Because we have the things, the ecosystems, the domestic markets. And here's another thing that ASEAN really has that I think is an advantage. Many ASEAN countries individually, but also as a bloc, have some of the most extensive networks of free trade agreements with other parts of the world. So, for example, if you're a multinational company and you want to do business in ASEAN, just by being here, because ASEAN has a preferential free trade agreement with, let's say, China, or let's say with the European Union, that gives you another opportunity to say, not only can I do business here in ASEAN, but my business here in ASEAN allows me maybe to sell to other big markets around the world. That's an advantage that ASEAN has that many other parts of the world don't have.
So can you say like we are top tier now?
Oh, there's no question. for U.S. business, there's a clear recognition that ASEAN globally is top tier as a bloc. Doesn't mean that there's still not more work that has to be done. But it doesn't mean this is a great place to do business.
Okay, great place to do business. What differentiates Indonesia, Mark, within ASEAN in the terms of market potential? Absolutely, we have the biggest population.
Yes.
Among ASEAN as in terms of also scale and long-term attractiveness.
So what differentiates Indonesia first, as you said, is scale. And also the presence of a lot of natural resources, particularly resources that are becoming more strategically important to the global economy. So the question then becomes, can Indonesia leverage these assets and these sort of competitive advantages in ways that further strengthens its position, both within ASEAN, but also globally, internationally? Again, talent, infrastructure investment, policies, rules, and regulations. If Indonesia can strengthen in those three areas, that will inherently improve Indonesia's position within ASEAN, but also even position ASEAN's position even stronger globally.
Okay. Mark, we come so far. Let's have a drink first. Some water before we talk about the supply chain. And also the readiness of Indonesia to play in the larger scale of in regional. So how, as global supply chain diversify beyond traditional hubs, how do you as companies see Indonesia's readiness to play in a larger role in regional and global value chain, do you think?
Yeah, the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, we're moving into a higher cost international environment around supply chains. Supply chains don't get changed quickly and easily. They take time.
They take time.
Okay. So in a sense, after 1 year, we've begun to maybe see companies sort of doing their research, maybe assessing potential changes they might want to make over the next 12 to 24 months. Once again, this is the opportunity now for governments like in Indonesia and ASEAN to say, okay, companies, if you're thinking about making some changes in your regional supply chains, what's really important to you? So one of the things we certainly have seen over the last year, a lot better dialogues between the government of Indonesia and U.S. companies. Like really sitting down and saying, hey, if you really want to make some alterations in your regional supply chain, we know you have an operation in Thailand, you have one in Vietnam, maybe you're thinking about expanding elsewhere. What's really important for you to maybe expand here in Indonesia? That's the starting point, having these deep conversations. I think out of those discussions, and this is where, again, US-ASEAN, we try to play the role to facilitate those discussions. It'll give that information to the government. And the government can then say, okay, now that we really kind of understand what these companies are looking for, what can we do to really maybe further adjust some of our domestic ecosystem? Maybe the SOE should be a bit more active in this industry to build up local suppliers. Because again, any supply chain operation, always look for several things. Costs, look for, does the environment have the suppliers and vendors to support the business? Another big important area, can maybe if we locate an operation here in Indonesia, most US firms, if they set up a factory, they'll want to source the inputs for the factory locally. But if they can't, if they need to import some products to go into the factory, how easy can they do it is really, really critical. And we know the government would like a company to maybe source everything in Indonesia. In fact, even in my country, America first, we want to make everything in America.
So how easy, 1 to 10, how easy to do things in Indonesia?
1 to 10, and really to make everything in any one country, it's not easy. We know governments want that to be the case, but usually the business realities, the technological realities, don't make it feasible. So our approach is this. We want to be able to say if there's a factory going to be created, the factory will source some things locally, and they need to source some things imported to run the factory. Because that's going to create the jobs, That's then going to create the output. And if the output is both for Indonesia, but also for exports, that's going to earn the hard currency that Indonesia wants. So it's got to be that balance between the two.
Mark, speaking of the specific segments, or maybe what strength of Indonesia, from critical minerals to EV components, we have strong, one of the mineral as the components of EV, battery to digital services. Position Indonesia as a strategic node in the future supply chains, and where does Indonesia stand in US companies' recalibration of supply chains footprints?
Yeah. So I would say over the last 4 or 5 years, of the 3 ASEAN countries that USABC members have seen the most growth potential, we call them the VIP club.
Okay.
Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines. VIP club.
Really?
Yes.
Not Singapore or Malaysia?
Well, when I say the fastest growing, these are the new areas where they're seeing the growth potential. Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, those economies are historically very well developed. There's lots of U.S. multinationals already there. But when companies saying, where's the new growth? Where's the next generation of growth? VIP is the club that we're seeing the most interesting. So Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines. And I think in those areas, again, it's a great time for, as U.S. companies are doing their homework, they're doing their research, they're looking around, these are the moments where, again, Indonesia's government and private sector can really put forth, here's what we have to offer. And I think, I'm glad you mentioned, the EV sector, because there's no question, 10, 15 years ago, when I would come to Indonesia, there was no such thing as companies saying, oh, we're going to build EV battery manufacturing facilities in Indonesia. Didn't exist. Now they knew the nickel was here, but the nickel was primarily being exported. You flash forward, 15 years later, Indonesia has now positioned itself as a key international node in the global supply chains for EV battery components. That's a very significant success. I think there are other potential resources that, not saying one can follow the same cookie cutter approach for everything, but it does show that it can be done here in Indonesia again. The right policies, right partners, both foreign and local, and again, clear kind of regulatory paths that give a sense for a business person. If I invest in Indonesia over the next 3 years, 5 years, I have a sense of the policy environment is going to be conducive. So again, I think the EV battery component is a great success story. It shows that it can be done in Indonesia.
It can be done in Indonesia. So which Indonesian sectors are currently viewed as the most promising for U.S. investment, Mark? Energy transition, digital economy, manufacturing, agriculture, or many others?
I wouldn't pick one, but I would say digital economy is certainly one. Because I think as you've seen last year, that's a lot of the big investments in ICT infrastructure. That's a signal that companies see the potential. They see the opportunity, right? So that's why they're investing in the infrastructure. So I think that's certainly one. Energy transition, I think, is another big one. From the private sector, and actually the two are related, because in many ways, it's the countries that are most successful in bringing on renewable sources of electricity are the ones that are actually maybe the most successful in attracting ICT infrastructure investment. So there's a real synergy there. Indonesia is, again, the things I mentioned earlier, whether it's the carbon trading, helping to bring more online solar or wind, those kinds of things. That's actually not only just good for energy production and more sustainable economy, but it's also actually one of the variables that the ICT infrastructure companies, they're looking for that. And they're actually comparing how much electricity, let's say in Thailand, can come from renewables. How much can come from renewables from Vietnam? How much can come from Indonesia? Once they determine how much, that actually will give one of the economies maybe an advantage in attracting more ICT infrastructure investment, data centers, cloud hubs, the undersea cables. These are all the kind of things that are so critical at that foundation level to then move into things like AI and cloud services.
Yeah.
So these are the things that are on the horizon.
So this kind of like AI, cybersecurity, fintech, and digital infrastructure, if we are looking at Indonesia's digital transformation agenda with this under new administration, it's fast growing consumer base, or how do you see this?
I think there's a lot of different facets of the ICT space. You mentioned a few.
Yeah.
Cybersecurity, AI, the infrastructure component. So within those different areas, there are things that are being done in Indonesia that are quite positive. I think from, again, the regulatory piece remains critical. We're seeing in some areas and in some sectors, governments around the region trying to put in place things like data localization requirements, like keeping certain data of certain types in a country's jurisdiction. We would argue that actually the best way to attract the ICT investment is to have an environment where the regulatory body says data can be kept here, but it can also be moved across borders safely because we want to protect the privacy and the information of the citizens of Indonesia. And so we would argue that the best way to actually do both, where you're promoting innovation, you're allowing data to flow across borders safely, is the ecosystem that will be most successful in attracting the investment.
So can you give your opinions regarding the issue about the cybersecurity in Indonesia? A few years back, we've been robbed.
Yes.
the data leaked and such. How can you assure that your members that Indonesia is now safe after several kind of quote unquote tragedy?
Well, cybersecurity is actually one of the areas where there's actually a lot of ongoing synergy between Indonesian government, Indonesian business, U.S. government, and U.S. business. Everyone recognizes that in order for the digital economy to really develop and provide the kinds of value to everyday citizens, we have to get the cybersecurity piece right. And no one country can sort of do cybersecurity by themselves. Because as you indicated, if there's a data breach or a hack, oftentimes it comes from cross-border. It comes from outside the country. So there needs to be a degree of cooperation, sharing of information, sharing of data to really respond to these cyber kinds of threats. US-ABC actually this year is actually working with a number of governments around workshops and other activities to fight the scam centers, because we know that's a big issue also for ASEAN. This is going to be a big part of our work in 2026 as we support the negotiators in the Digital Economy Framework Agreement. So again, there's a shared belief. We have to get the cybersecurity. People have to feel safe that if they go online and make a purchase, use their credit card, that information will be kept safe and secure.
Yeah, private data is very, very important. So how do geopolitical dynamics influence the way U.S. company also compete or collaborate with other major players in the region? Marc?
Yeah, the geopolitics, as we know, they're changing. These are things that U.S. companies have to understand.
Yeah.
But they don't really drive the business. They're taken into account, but they don't really dictate the decision of, do I want to put a factory in this country or put a factory in that country? Those decisions are still driven fundamentally by the business and commercial decisions, the variables. How much does water cost? Can I find land that I want to use for my factory? Can I find the workers that I need? Those are still the biggest variables that drive those business decisions. Again, ASEAN's well positioned because of the fundamentals that it has. Indonesia has its certain advantages. Big market, natural resources, those kinds of things. So again, different companies will assess these respective variables when they're thinking about, maybe do I want to build a factory in one of the three VIP countries, Vietnam, Indonesia, Philippines.
But can we do IVP then Indonesia come first?
I think in some areas, for some sectors, Indonesia may be first.
Okay. So in these terms, like Vietnam is the first in terms of the cheap workers, or?
Well, actually, believe it or not, Vietnam has done really well. Not so much because of costs, Vietnam has really done well because I would argue because of talent.
Okay.
They've made big investments over the last decade in producing high quality, high skilled talent. And that has then made the Vietnam ecosystem much more attractive for high tech investment. Now, Vietnam has been successful also, again, because of their trade policy.
Yeah.
Vietnam has the most FTAs of any other country in Southeast Asia. FTA with Europe, FTA with ASEAN, FTA China.
Okay.
Indonesia, Philippines are now doing more of that as well.
Okay.
We think that's quite good.
So we're on the way.
Exactly.
Okay, Mark. So we've come to the last part of our discussions and conversations. How do you see the Indonesia-US economic partnership evolving over the next decade?
So I think if and when this government-to-government tariff deal is done, I think that's going to set a good next step in the evolution of this relationship over the next 5-10 years. I think there's a recognition on both sides that really the relationship is okay and it's good, but there's so much more that could be done. Hopefully this trade agreement becomes a good first step. Hopefully some of the commercial deals that are associated with the deal, see those things happen. Hopefully some of the changes in policy and regulations that are part of the deal, hopefully those get effectively addressed. I think if those three things can be done over the next 12 months, then the subsequent 3, 4, 5 years, we'll see a real uptick in US-Indonesia economic relations going forward.
Okay. What role do you expect Indonesia to play in US companies' Indo-Pacific strategy?
I think that's a good question. And companies, again, as I said, they're looking at the entire Asia Pacific region. And they're making decisions. I think they'll be making decisions over the next 12 to 24 months as to whether the last 5 years of having a China plus strategy, is that still a winning strategy? Or is there a need maybe to further evolve that? That's why I mentioned earlier. Companies over the next 12 months are going to be assessing a lot of different things. It's a perfect time for ASEAN and Indonesia to say, let's have these discussions. What do you really need? What are you really looking for? And again, two things. Looking for lower costs because supply chain costs are going up. Looking for more certainty because there's more uncertainty. If Indonesia's government can say in industry after industry, we can offer more certainty, and in industry, in terms of our ecosystems, we can be competitive on cost. That'll put Indonesia in the mix for companies to say, okay, if we want to make a change in our China plus strategy, maybe now we add Indonesia to it with an operation or a facility. Or if we have to really change our China plus strategy, maybe we need more of a deeper ASEAN strategy. Okay, if we want to do that, Indonesia may be the right place for us to be located an ASEAN deeper strategy. So these are the kind of things I think we're very much at the 2026. We're at the beginning. But it's going to be an interesting year.
The year of horse.
I got to run fast.
Got to run fast. Then how can Indonesia and US-ABC work together to unlock more high-quality investment and innovation partnerships in the near future?
So, this year I can tell you we're going to have US-ABC is going to be bringing a number of delegations of U.S. companies to Indonesia throughout the year. We'll be doing activities on the ASEAN regional level, but doing them here in Indonesia. In fact, early last week, in fact, we did an ASEAN regional food and agricultural regional initiative here in Jakarta, in fact. So there'll be more activities like that. I think on the commercial basis, you'll see the U.S. Embassy really expand their efforts to promote business. And then last but not least, the Indonesian Embassy in Washington. The new ambassador, not new, but the ambassador that's there now.
Been there once.
Very, very, very active. Very, very committed to promoting the commercial relationship. I also think there's going to be 2 big events this year that I think will create more B2B opportunities. So, for example, in May of this year, there's a big event in the United States called the Select USA Conference, which allows for delegations from all across ASEAN to come to the United States to look at commercial opportunities in the United States. I would say the last couple of years, we've seen steady increase in the number of Indonesian business leaders that have come to this event. And I know this year, again, I expect to be even bigger. But also, I believe it's in October,
Yeah.
there's going to be a very large sort of Indonesia International Expo highlighting the various kinds of products and goods that are made in Indonesia that we hope will attract businesses from all across the United States to come to that event as well. So again, I think these two big commercial events offer good opportunities to really strengthen commercial ties this year.
So, looking ahead, Marc, what single opportunity in Indonesia do you believe is most underestimated by global companies?
Well, I would say again,
Yeah.
15 years ago, who would have thought
Yeah.
Indonesia would now be in the global supply chain for EV battery manufacturing components? Okay. I would say that 10 years from now, I think in the area of energy, there's a great potential for Indonesia to really unlock
Okay.
both
Finger crossed.
both traditional, but also in the renewable space. ASEAN is doing a lot in that space. One of the most important projects at the regional level is the development of the ASEAN Regional Grid Project. If that kind of project can really move forward and really begin to connect the various economies so that countries in ASEAN that have excess supply of energy can more easily export that energy, earn resources, and countries that are seeing rapid growth of energy demand can bring in energy, that can be a game changer for all the countries in the region. So again, I think the energy transition agenda can be really big for Indonesia. And maybe 10 years from now, we look back and say,
Okay.
wow, Indonesia really was able to plug in
yeah.
and took advantage of that wave as it moved forward. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I need to ask this: what the message to the policymaker to make this VIP member to be IVP member?
IVP?
Please, Marc.
If I had to point to this one area, I go back to in an environment of uncertainty and an environment of higher costs. Do policies, do regulations that create more certainty and create lower costs. If you do those things, that can be a big source of advantage for Indonesia.
Thank you so much, Marc, for joining us. So
My
again,
pleasure.
looking forward to many opportunities between Indonesia and the US companies.
Yes.
Thank you once again.
Thank you.
So there was Jakarta Globe Corner 1, among others. More is coming. I'm Iqbal Switami Hadja signing out. See you next time. Thank you so much.
Yes.
Is everything okay?
Well done. Yeah.
Love your watch.
No.
Thank you.